Welcome to the BioTalk Unzipped podcast, where we unzip the stories behind medical progress by sharing the latest and greatest advances in biopharmaceuticals and medical technologies in a fun, entertaining, and enlightening format. And now your co-hosts, Gregory Austin and Dr. Chad Briscoe. And now in part 2 of our conversation with Jason Burke, please enjoy episode 13, The AI Prescription, Revolutionizing Pharma and Patient Care. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on this episode.
We were talking about your participation at the business schools locally and doing some of that training. So we talked very briefly about doing some of the executive training and some strategizing at a corporate level.
Mm-hmm.
How do you take that down to I don't know if down's the right word, but over transport it to the graduate, business school level and let me say, teaching it at Duke and at North Carolina? That's impressive, Jason. So yeah.
Well, thanks.
But yeah, so tell me how do you translate that over?
Well, first I'll say it's an honor to be able to participate in both of those schools. They're both wonderful schools, and I have gotten so much personal enjoyment and satisfaction out of being able to spend time with the students and really the people that are going to be the next leaders that come through our industry. It's super exciting, and it's super energizing because they're bringing a level of enthusiasm and optimism that's so healthy for an industry like ours that really lives and breathes innovation every day. So I really enjoy doing it. Most of the work that I've done with both of those schools was focused on analytics and data sciences and helping students understand what is the landscape of opportunity for using data to make medicine smarter. And the typical classes would be a mixture of people that were coming from, that they were all graduate level or executive participants. Mm-hmm. Some would be coming from life sciences, others would be coming from healthcare. A lot of them would be international students who didn't necessarily have any understanding of how the U.S. healthcare system works. Because in their country, healthcare may be a national right or
US
service or
healthcare
whatever.
System
so
works?
This weird.
That's news. That's a newsflash.
That's lecture 6, actually. Yeah. So a lot of it is just kind of getting them oriented to kind of laying the foundation. Yeah, so one of the things that we did in designing the Duke program was we kind of stood back and asked the question, what would an employer see from a graduate of our program that they wouldn't necessarily see if they were coming from another school? Like what would be something that would be unique about this? And one of the things that came screaming to the forefront was most of the time when students are coming out of these programs, they may have technical aptitude with using, say, analytical software or doing particular kinds of analyses. But most of the time, they've never actually touched real world data, like not production grade institutional data. So we actually secured an anonymized set of electronic medical records, and we made it a part of the course curriculum to have the students break up into teams and develop novel analyses of these electronic medical records to discern things like, what can you tell about this population of patients? What can you tell about the progression of diseases? And if you were trying to develop a novel approach, maybe it's a digital health application, or maybe it's a new value-based contract, or maybe it's just a care management program. How would you think about that from the kinds of questions that you would want to ask and the kinds of analytical techniques that you might want to use with the data? And it was so much fun. I taught this course year after year, and I never saw the same analysis twice. Like every team would come at it kind of totally different, and every student that left the program, when they were having their job interviews, they could say, yeah, I've actually worked with real world healthcare data. And so it was a really powerful way to make it real for folks. And so I really enjoyed it, and I think more of that is going to be needed as we think about the areas of AI that are coming.
Excellent. Well, we're at that portion of the show. It's time again for new news.
New news.
Reported on March 8th in VentureBeat, Sharon Goldman reported that In Silico Medicine, a Hong Kong and New York startup, unveiled the first AI-generated and AI-discovered drug. Probably heard about this, a significant breakthrough in the use of AI in drug discovery. The new paper published in Nature Biotechnology details the journey of INS 018-055, claimed to be the first AI-generated and AI-discovered drug, and this candidate targets idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a rare but aggressive lung disease that has progressed into the phase 2 clinical trial stage. The drug's discovery involved utilizing In Silico's AI platform called Pharma.ai, which combines biology AI and generative chemistry AI. By leveraging those AI models trained on vast datasets, the company identified and prioritized the disease targets, rapidly designed those drug compounds, and then approached this very drastically accelerated drug development process. So they got to the first phase in clinical trials in just 2.5 years, as opposed to maybe around, I think the average is what, 6, and a fraction of the cost as well. So Jason, I'm curious, in your experience with AI data and startups, what do you think of this? How do you see it affecting investors? Do you think more money might flow easily to startups who are embracing this type of generative AI discovery model?
Yeah, and I've been passing that particular story around.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am familiar with it. And I've been passing it around for exactly that reason. You know, what the two general things that I see right now in talking to folks about this is folks are um, they're not necessarily aware of what AI can do, like what its potential applications are. And in many cases, they're kind of underestimating the what's available from a methods perspective, because they're measuring it by how well it can carry on a conversation or generate a blog post, as opposed to actually we've been investing in this for decades. This is not new. And then the other thing that they really struggle with is, what are the use cases? Okay, great, you've got this amazing new set of capabilities. Where am I going to get quantifiable business value out of it?
Mm-hmm.
And that story is a great example of being able to show people the world of both, right? That, okay, here's a very specific industry application. Um, it's doing something that is very difficult for the human brain to do. Complexity exceeds cognition in this space. So it's a great area to look for AI to help with. And it translates into tangible business benefit. It dramatically cuts down the time of bringing products to market. What we hope to see over time is, not only does it do that, it may actually help us build products that have greater efficacy and lower side effects, because the design is much more targeted and the design can be informed by known issues related to safety and side effects that we can constrain the design parameters to. So to me, I think it's really exciting. It's just the tip of the spear. There's so many companies that are out there doing that. I think the last FDA numbers that I saw was, since 2021, they've had over 500 regulatory submissions in the medical device space that involved AI, and over 300 related to pharmaceutical products. Don't hold me to those, but I think those are the numbers.
We're quoting you,
Um,
putting it out
and
there.
So this is not some future thing that
Yeah,
is, we need to like monitor and maybe one day it's going to happen. Like it's
happening.
here now. I tell people my career has been a strategist, and part of my job is to amplify weak signals. And so the signal's now being amplified. Like this is a thing.
Hmm.
Let's start thinking about how do we accelerate the value creation associated with it.
Very good. That kind of leads into my next question in terms of evaluating companies. You know, you've been involved in
Mhm.
venture capital and private equity and evaluating these strategic investments in emerging technologies. Can you walk us through your process of assessing those potential technologies to benefit both companies and patients?
Yeah, sure. So Again, most of my value in deal teams is often related to evaluating the underlying emerging technology that's in place. And over the past few years, the majority of that's been related to analytics and data sciences. Usually, at the point that I get brought in, someone has identified a company that is an interesting potential company to collaborate or work with. And what they're looking for is some understanding of the underlying value related with the intellectual property that the company has. So, okay, it's a AI company. What does that AI thing look like? What does it consist of? How good is it? How do we think about it? And so when I get involved, I'm usually going in really asking a whole host of business and technology questions. On the business side, I want to understand, so who's building this? How did it get ideated in the first place? What are the skill sets of the team? What are the processes that they're using for engineering the solutions or the capabilities that the organization has? How mature are their practices when we think of things like deployment and maintenance and security and things like that. And then on the technology side, really the things that I'm looking at are how unique is this capability that they have. The wonderful thing about artificial intelligence, or really any form of advanced analytics, is that the barrier to entry, if you want to innovate, is actually pretty low. You can go out and get software capabilities in the open source community and have something up and running in your garage this evening. But that may not necessarily represent any kind of long-term value from a commercial or market perspective. And so,
Sure.
so how do we think about the uniqueness around what a company's capability might be? That might involve a particularly clever or unique algorithm or approach that they're using. So, for example, I've looked at companies that were using AI to detect things that they could not detect with sensors, that they could look across a variety of data points and infer that an underlying thing is there, even though they couldn't measure the underlying thing. Now, that's really clever, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful way of using technology. The other thing that I'm usually looking at is the data itself. For predictive analytics and definitely for artificial intelligence to function at a high level, you have to have some mechanism for feeding it good fuel. It depends on the kind of analytical algorithms you're using in terms of what that fuel looks like. If it's traditional AI applications, of course, we have to care about things like feature engineering and things like that. If it's more this generative kind of AI, there are different ways of thinking about the source data for it. Uh, for a long time, investors, I think, were under the mistaken assumption that the valuation that they should attach to these kinds of opportunities was somehow related to the amount of data that the company had that was flowing through the algorithm or the model.
Right.
And I've really tried to discourage people from drawing that conclusion. I actually think data is a commodity. It's not an equally weighted commodity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not to
Yeah.
suggest that there isn't good and bad data. There definitely is, and better data is definitely better. But if a company does not have data, there are lots of ways of getting it.
Mhm.
If a company does not have unique intellectual property, there's not a lot of ways of getting it. So,
Mhm.
so I've
Mhm.
really tried to encourage people to think more about it from that lens.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And
I like that because the data, the commodity angle is interesting to me because I hadn't thought of data as a commodity in that way. But I think we do have reason to be concerned about our data and everything. But from when you step back and you say, oh, this company has all the data or that company has all the data, but what I am sort of convincing myself, or maybe you convince me, is that maybe the company that's going to win the next stage isn't the one with all the data today. It's the one with the best, most innovative product and IP that's going to take over in 10 years, right? So
Right.
The goal right now to make money today is to have all the data, but the goal to make money in 10 or 20 years may not be the guy who has all the data today. It's the guy who's got the most fascinating invention or creative idea that he's going to commoditize for the next wave.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and
yeah.
if you're familiar with Clayton Christensen's kind of innovation curves
Mm.
in technology, right?
Hmm.
So what we're seeing in spaces like AI is really a compression of that process. So when ChatGPT came out, everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, look at this amazing like large language model," and the immediate conclusion was ChatGPT is going to kind of rule the world. Well, today you've got ChatGPT and Gemini and a dozen other large language models,
Yeah.
and they're all operating somewhere near 10% of each other in terms of the value
Hmm.
that they have.
Hmm.
So even the model approach itself is not necessarily a unique angle. I was looking at one company this week though that had developed a chip that will run a large language model algorithm at 20 times the speed of a native large language model interface.
Hmm.
So that's unique,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's
Because
fast.
one of the
Hmm.
barriers that we have right now in terms of large language models is latency, right? You
Hmm.
can't just turn the thing open on a a phone call or whatever on because it takes time to process. Um, but creative ideas for how to take that kind of computational capacity and bring it into a different executing form factor, whether it's a chip or a mobile device or things like that, those start to look a lot more interesting to me.
Interesting. How do you use AI in your own life, and do you have a favorite platform?
I do not have a favorite platform. I kind of feel like my job is to kind of go out and sample each one of
Hmm.
them. And honestly, Gregory, I kind of take a very haphazard approach to it. um, I, I listen to a ton of podcasts and read a lot of media sources or whatever to kind of prod my thinking on this on a regular basis. Um, and then in terms of how I think about plugging it into my everyday life, I really just look for kind of unique angles that of some task that I'm doing that maybe I hadn't ever thought of doing it before. A lot of the thinking right now around how AI may be deployed in many enterprises feels a lot like what we think of as human machine teaming, where it's not that the task is being taken over by a machine, it's that a human and a machine are collaborating together on a task.
Yeah.
And hopefully kind of leaning in on that. So I've just been starting to look for opportunities to do that, whether it's fielding questions that I would have historically fielded through search instead of doing
Yep.
search. I'll put it into an LLM and say, what is it?
Hmm.
What does the LLM show up with? And
Yeah.
a lot of times what the LLM shows up with is wrong. But that's part of the
Hmm.
fun for me is kind of seeing, well, where is it strong and where is it weak?
Agreed. Yeah, I'll experiment with Chat GPT for certain things that are just purely language based, and then I'll go to Copilot when I want something that's a little more contemporary, or it's going to give me the source files or the source links, so I can go and look into it a little bit deeper and kind of check the facts and so forth. So it just depends on what I'm needed
Yeah,
to do.
definitely. Yeah.
It's interesting when you talk about comparing it with Google, because I've I keep going back to Google or to whatever search engine, and then I go, why aren't I using Chat GPT or something else? Because things like wanting to know what's a good restaurant in downtown New York that serves pizza, or what's the best pizza. It's just so much richer, more dynamic model. Why do you think why do you think these big search engine companies were kind of late to the game? What I don't understand why they weren't.
Right.
Why didn't Google have Chat GPT before Chat
Right.
GPT?
Yeah, so my it's interesting because when I think of leaders in the machine learning space, if you just set aside the LLM thing,
Hmm.
Google would be in the top three if they're not number one.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the entire Google search algorithm framework, which of course they don't generally publish the insides of, but it's a massive machine learning model, right? They're taking search parameters, they're converting them into machine learning vectors, and at the end of that funnel, we all have gotten used to it coming back with exactly what we're looking for most of the time. And that's because we've had these AI capabilities for a long time. They were just never put in this kind of context before. I actually think some of the most interesting and amazing things that are going to happen with this are not through the chat interfaces. I think those will be amazing things as well. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see entirely new forms of software emerge as a result of this.
Sure.
So if we think, for example, about, I think all three of us kind of grew up in the era where video games were generally accessible in some form or another. You could play them in the arcade, you could play them at home on your Atari or your Nintendo or whatever your thing was. You could play them on computers. And, up until recently, every game that was ever built was designed with a fixed set of constraints, right? If you
Yep.
wanted to build a first-person shooter, you had to figure out how to model an opponent, how to model a field, how to model a weapon, how to model a goal for a level, right?
And there would be 100 levels that were each designed, and then that was it. You were done, and
Right.
yeah.
So my suspicion is, in the foreseeable future, we're going to see a video game that you never play the same game twice.
Right.
Because I don't think it should be necessary for the game to pre-configure those levels and those opponents. As a matter of fact, I would suspect, if I were a game designer, of which I'm not, so maybe this is a terrible idea, I don't know, but if I were a game designer, I think one of the things that I would be doing is looking to build opponents in the machine, in the game, that learn what I'm good at as a player and what I'm not good at, and intentionally design opponents that are challenging for me.
Yeah.
I
Same
love
with
that. Yeah.
levels, same, right? So I think there's this whole new category of thinking about software that's coming. I mean, we're already talking about it in terms of, not necessarily thinking about programmers' jobs as being the same as they were. I don't think we're doing away with programmers, but I do think that the idea of machine learning algorithms being able to generate code can change the job of a coding person to something that may be even more powerful and meaningful. But I also think, our design constraints around solutions hopefully will start to change as well. That there'll be new forms of experiences that we can create as a result of this that don't look like what we've been doing in the past.
Yeah. No question that'll happen. It's just a matter of
Yeah.
time.
So, Jason, something I wanted to ask you, and this is just gonna demonstrate, because we've been talking about all this AI and getting all
Mm.
and this technology side, but I want to ask you about something that's a bit away from that. But you
Hmm.
spent time in healthcare, and
Yeah,
you spent time, really direct patient care with, within a hospital
yeah.
setting, and you also spent time in pharma. And one of the things that I've wondered about, I started thinking about it when I was reading your bio, is there's this interface between the pharma companies making drugs and healthcare industry receiving those drugs.
Hmm.
And I have this feeling that there's not enough interplay between the two, right? Do they really know? Do they really know the customers, and do the customers have a real chance to give feedback to pharma? Am I onto something there? Is there activity in that space that you're involved in at all? It's just something that I was thinking about that I thought you might have an interesting opinion on.
Yeah, it was part of, I think, my own learning process as I got more into uh, the direct healthcare side of the industry, was really trying to understand how their operating environment differed than what I was expecting, because I had only ever come at it either as an academic researcher or as a patient.
Hmm.
I'd never
Yeah.
actually been in the delivery part of it. And what struck me in uh, in working in that space was how much harder the work is than I think what people would typically understand the nature of the work to be. That you're dealing in an environment that has so many external factors and forces that are kind of coming into play on the practice of medicine. And it strikes me that in general, the pharmaceutical, biotech, med device companies are not necessarily well designed to penetrate that dynamic, that level of chaos, if you want to think of
Yeah,
it that way.
yeah.
Um, one of the things that I did when I first got there was to try and get my arms around. So what does research look like here, in Duke and UNC and other academic medical centers? Like how does that work? And it was surprising to me how something that was so important to me from a career perspective, like having spent years in research, how it was even among academic medical systems, it was kind of relegated off to the side. And
Hmm.
you kind of look at it and go, well, why is that? Like, clinical research as a care option would seem to be like a really attractive thing, but there's no infrastructure for it. There's no incentives for it. It creates variability in a operating environment that you're trying desperately to constrain the variability in, so that you're sure that you're delivering great care. And when we think about things like medical education and medical science liaisons, and trying to navigate the complexity of physicians understanding what our treatments are, what are the best cases and applications for it, um, there's just so much else that's occupying that mental mind share that I think it's difficult to envision how to really do something that's more powerful.
Yeah.
And I left the experience really feeling like there was such a greater opportunity for life sciences firms to not just be product companies, but to be service companies.
Mm.
That I think that there's so much value that could be unlocked because they have both the financial capacity and the skill sets to help overcome some of these challenges. And I don't have a silver bullet for what it is, but it does strike me that there is this kind of great divide that's there. And it's, I never met a physician that didn't want to do the next greatest best thing for their patients. But I don't know that I ever met one that wasn't always also grappling with the complexity of the environment and the volume of patients and just the number of things were going on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, there's no doubt if you go to the big med centers anywhere, they are busy and crowded, and people are moving fast, and people are working hard,
Yeah,
and so yeah, when you think about it, inserting research into that environment, like where do you put it, right? How do you drive a
right.
wedge in there and have it be productive and not disrupt the hard work that's going on and the delicate patient care in so
Right.
many cases. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. And
it's fascinating. Yeah.
you take that then and you then think about, okay, so precision medicine actually makes this worse, right?
It does. It
It actually
does.
makes it worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
had multiple clients who are like, look, we have this amazing genomic capability, and this
Hmm.
genomic capability will help physicians diagnose rare diseases, specific conditions with an unprecedented level of precision.
Hmm.
How do we get it into this environment? And I'm like, well, it's going to take a long time because that environment is not open to. They're not well prepared right at the moment to accept that. They would all want it. They'd all run towards it.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. For sure. For
Hmm.
sure. Fascinating.
So on a more personal level, it looks like you got your amateur radio license recently, less than a year ago. Was that a ham radio license? Okay. What
Yes.
what got you into that, and what do you like to do with it?
So I have an infinitely curious mind, and when I run out of things to think about, I have to go find something else. And so I'm not exactly sure how I got kind of turned on to this, but just started doing some reading about the history of radio as a technology here in the U.S. and around the world, and the whole ham radio community. And my going into it, my only understanding was that I knew you had to have a license, and I knew it involved people with radios other than radios that I owned that were all like talking to each other, right? Um, and it turned into this wonderfully nostalgic technological deep dive that I've still only dropped this far into something that's this deep, right? I'm still navigating my way into it, but absolutely amazing intersection of science and technology and communication. Um, and and so what I've been doing with it really is just learning about it. It involves a lot of skills that I did not necessarily have a background in from a science perspective. So I never really studied much in terms of physics or electrical engineering or anything like that. So I didn't really kind of bring that to the table, and have been trying to kind of pick it up as I go along. But what's been interesting and rewarding to me about it, other than the nostalgic experience, which is just doing something that isn't this leading edge stuff. It's actually stuff that's been around for a while. But what's been interesting to me about it is a community of innovators, and I had no idea that this innovation was going on. But most of the community are people who are still figuring out new and creative ways of using this basic electronics and physics capability to do things that you would just not know about, right? Or if you weren't in the community, you would not necessarily know that this was possible, right? So I'll give you a few examples.
Yeah.
So one example is you can hook up your ham radio and bounce your radio signal off the face of the moon, and it will bounce back to you.
Wow.
So you will say, "Hello, moon," and 4 seconds later, you will hear your voice back on your radio going, "Hello,
Wow.
moon," right?
Never would have thought to do that.
Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, it
remarkable,
is.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and any licensed operator can do this. Like, you just need an antenna and a radio, and you have to know the steps to kind of
Wow.
go through and do it, right? You can send email over radio waves. There's a whole protocol for doing
Wow.
that. You can have weak digital communications over radio waves. I would not have known this. In my backyard here in North Carolina, I have one antenna that is strung up. From that antenna, as of this week, I reached 65 different countries around the world that I've been talking to using weak
Wow.
radio signal propagation.
Wow.
Like and like I said, the well is endless. There's just this
Yeah.
constant pool of creative, cool things that people have been doing with it that has just been really heartwarming for me to kind of roll up my sleeves and try to get a better understanding of.
But the technology is the same base technology from 7,500 years ago. More.
Yep. I mean, there's been some minor point improvements. So, like,
Sure.
because my first ham radio is a software defined radio, so it's processing signals, but it's doing it not just with transistors or whatever. There's actual software in the box.
Vacuum tubes. Yeah.
Yeah. So the screen, as opposed to just having numbers on it, it also gives me a spectral analysis. So I can look at the screen and see where people are talking, like what frequencies they're talking on, because I'm seeing a real-time graph of the radio activity across the spectrum. So you can do things that 50 years ago you wouldn't have been able to do. But other than that, yeah, it's the exact same basic methodology, and most of the training is delivered by folks whose hair is a little bit whiter than mine and has been around the block a little ways, and they're passing on the information that was passed on to them.
That's cool. Yeah.
Cool.
That's fun.
So cool.
So yeah, I recommend it to anybody who has a pinch amp for just like noodling and trying things out. It's been a ton of fun.
Nice. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's cool.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, Chad, did you have any other further questions?
Yeah. Gosh, Jason, this has been just fascinating. I'm so glad we brought you on. I knew we'd have a great conversation. And I can't thank you enough for spending a little over an hour with us today to dive into these topics. I learned so much, as I always do,
Oh,
when we do
Same.
these.
listen, it's totally my pleasure. I love talking to you guys and really admire what you're doing. And it's such a treat for me to just be able to spend the afternoon with you. So
Well,
thank you.
thanks. Well, we appreciate your
Great,
time.
thanks.
How can people best reach you, Jason?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn continuously. Whack Jason Burke. We'll get you there for sure.
All right.
You can also find me on our company's website, which is creoinc.net,
Okay.
creoinc.net.
Radioinc.net.
All
Got it.
right.
All right. We'll get that on to the show notes so you'll be able to reach Jason and Creo and any other great
Yeah.
questions you have there. Thanks again for your time. And until next time, we'll see you on BioTalk Unzipped. Thank you so much for listening to this episode 13 of BioTalk Unzipped, the AI prescription revolutionizing pharma and patient care with Jason Burke. Please do subscribe, like this episode, and give us a comment. Let us know what you'd like to see in upcoming episodes. In the meantime, take care, and we'll see you soon.